Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to be with you. I'm going to come out here because we've got a PowerPoint, and I think it's going to be easier to operate it from here. I'm going to end with a few comments on what I think is important in terms of the title of this exhibition, a few points of principle to consider in terms of education and social change. But before I get to that point, which will be just at the very end, I want to put the context of where I'm coming from so that you all understand the background and experience that I've been involved in. In 1995, myself and my brother, who's actually presenting in the next room, opened up the Holocaust Centre in the UK. It was the first of its kind. Can you see that? Shall we dim the lights a bit? Yeah. Let me think. Sorry, I thought that would magically happen when I said that. Oh, there it does. Thank you. And is that any better? Yeah. So this opened in 1995, and so you can imagine it's the first of its kind in the UK, and we were building it during the early 1990s. And it was there as a warning from history of what happened to the Jewish communities and, of course, other groups, and many groups that are victims of the Nazis during the Second World War. But as we were building it, we weren't expecting these tumultuous, terrible events to take place in the early part and the mid-1990s, which became a huge challenge to us. Which I'll talk about in one moment. Just to say, it is a place of memory, it's a memorial, and it's there to bring dignity to victims and to survivors. As well as a permanent exhibition, there are memorial gardens, and here are rows. A lot of you have been there. There's the international students, I think, have how many of you have been there? Yeah. So there are the memorial gardens there, and these roses have been planted by survivors and their families in memory of victims. There's a permanent museum. But there are two permanent museums. School children visit on a daily basis. There's about 600 to 700, about 800 now, including the younger children that come each week to the centre. All of them have an opportunity to meet with a survivor of the Holocaust. And we do sixth form conferences for older high school children and university children. Survivor talks are important because it's not only about first-hand witnesses, which we all know in this room are incredibly powerful and had that privilege and that experience yesterday. But it's also, I think, helps to humanise. For children who weren't there at the time, now we're talking 2 or 3 generations, 4 generations away from the period, separated by geography, to meet somebody that was there and to see, well, that's like my grandmother or my grandfather is extremely important part of what, I guess, Urban Stav was talking about yesterday in terms of humanising. We have training days that take place here, not only for teachers but other professionals, police, prison officers, the local government, and it's not just about history, and that's what I want to emphasise. And at the point at the end, we have to think about the purpose of what all this is about. It's not just looking into the details of what happened during the Second World War. Of course, we go into that as well. But we have to keep in mind, what are we trying to achieve by this education? If you don't keep that in mind, then you don't know what the outcome is. It's like any activity or project. And so, particularly with these training days, these professional people are coming to think about issues in our own society, our own community today, in and around the Holocaust Centre, to do with prejudice, to do with racism, to do with exclusion, anyone that's being excluded from a community. And they're interactive days in which you can see there are people, yes, they're sitting listening here, but we'll break out into groups and have discussions about what are the problems and how can they be solved. But it's using that point of history, the Holocaust or genocide, which because we will bring other genocide into this, not just about the Holocaust, as a point of departure into these discussions and these debates. The Journey is a new exhibition. I haven't got time to go into it all, but it's designed for younger children, sort of 10, 11, 12-year-olds, and it tells the story of a young Jewish refugee boy that escaped from Nazi Germany, and it doesn't go into killings and the concentration camps, but touches on the issues that younger people can relate to start thinking at an earlier age about how and why these catastrophic events happen, and happen in not only in Europe but around the world. We have used theatre. This is a Rwandan theatre group that we toured around the UK on a number of occasions, and many Rwandans from different backgrounds that perform traditional dance and theatre that they've put together themselves, but just as a different medium to represent not only the history again, but the issues that arise from it, and they've got a very strong message of prevention and social action that we can all take part. Now, the other memorial that I'm involved with the Aegis Trust is the Kigali Genocide Memorial. Now, where all this came about, I mentioned at the beginning that we were building the Holocaust Centre in the UK in the early 1990s. And a year before we opened, the genocide in Rwanda happened, which was, just unimaginable. We were seeing this in our newspapers and on our TV screens, and it took us some time to understand the gravity and the scale of what was going on. I think because we're so used to thinking, well, bad things happen in Africa. And this was the sort of idea, and we're here, we're building a warning to history and failed to see any of those connections. And then 2 months before we opened, the genocide in Sarajevo happened, and this was, a massive challenge to us. What are we doing? Building a warning to history about something that happened 50 years ago, when genocide happening on our doorstep. And that eventually led to the founding of Aegis Trust, which I'm the chief executive today. And Aegis has a mission which is all about diminishing, preventing genocide. I haven't got time to look at all these things we do that involve international justice, it involves policy campaigning at government level. We're involved in campaigns around Sudan, for example, and a lot of other activities. One of our main programs, which is relevant to what we're discussing today, is in Rwanda. We were invited by the government of Rwanda. How am I doing for time? Oh, I'm going to keep this really short, because I know we need to have sufficient time to the end. But we were invited by the government of Rwanda to help set up the memorial, the main memorial, in the capital city, Kigali. We were very reluctant to do this, but they were very persuasive on the grounds that oh, do I need that one? Can you hear me at the back? So sorry. So what do we do? Can we carry on? Yeah. So the government of Rwanda invited Aegis Trust to be involved in setting up the Genocide Memorial in Kigali for 2 reasons. First of all, because our mission is about prevention, and they understood that the memorials need to have a preventive role. We were persuaded to become involved. It's a very long story, but I'm going to skip on to some of the key points that I'd like just to bring out about it. These are cues of Rwandans going into the museum. There is a museum there, but it's also a place of burial. Nearly all the victims of the capital city are buried at this memorial site. That's estimated 250,000 victims of this one place. These are it's a particular school that's visiting the memorial. So again, as with the Holocaust Centre, first and foremost, the memorial is about respect and dignity for the victims. But it's also a place where memory and education come together. And school children visit the centre. And what I would say is that it's not so much about, the narrative that's on the museum wall. That's secondary to the conversations and the discussions that take place in the school groups that come to the centre. And when we're thinking about the education, there's 5 points, or 4 points really, that I would like to make, because two of them are related. First of all, it's hugely important to understand the purpose of the education. It kind of seems obvious, but I'm telling you, after 15, 20 years working in this area, there is so much confusion about why you would want to teach genocide or the Holocaust as memorial. It's something that's done, but it's not thought it can give us for why. Why are we doing this? Now, if it's about just keeping the memory alive, that is quite legitimate to do that and to teach the history. But that is different to wanting to use the memorial for the education for social change, which is what we're talking about today. In some respects, memory and memorial will always have a social impact. They're part of that memory that passes down to generation, impact on that whole collective memory about how communities and society remember, and therefore it affects identity, it affects the way we think about each other and the wider world. And therefore, education at memorial sites can have one part of an impact in all of that collective memory and how people view each other. With the Aegis Trust, we have a very specific purpose. This is about education for making change, about social change. And what is that change about? Particularly in Kigali, thank you, particularly in Kigali, we want to, rather than the memorial dividing children because of the focus on these were the victims, these were the Hutus that did all of this, then we want to try and find ways in which to bring people together to diminish the fear and the mistrust. So we have to avoid collective blame or guilt, and we do that by the language that we use. So it's not about the Hutus, it's about the individuals that were involved in killing, and in fact we will highlight Hutus that were involved in rescue to demonstrate not an entire group that was involved in all of this. There's individual responsibility, and also there are choices that we have in situations of genocide. We also have activities to promote critical thinking. That is left to the Rwanda staff, for example, to do this. I can give different examples of how they do this. I'm not going to, because I know that my time is up, but if you want to discuss this later on, I'm very happy to talk more about that and why it's really important. And the final point I want to make is that, I've been driven off here now, is that Irving mentioned yesterday, it's really important to learn by doing. And Carl Wilkins, a friend of mine who was the only American that stayed in Rwanda during the genocide, talked about the importance of service. That we can hear, we can think about things, we can discuss things, and when we do something with our hands, when we get up and do something in response to what we've learned, it has a much greater impact, not only on other people, but on ourselves, and helps to internalise. And later on, because we haven't got time now, we'll talk, perhaps Richard will talk about the ways in which some of the students have taken part in activities as a result of education, and why that action, and that social action, is an important part of the learning process at the memorial site. I'll stop there, but there's so much more we can talk about, but I hope we'll have time to discuss later.